Welcome back to the Bitcoin Reformation Podcast. We are so glad that you are here with us three Lutheran Christian pastors who love Jesus, but also have a love for Bitcoin and are happy to have you along with us as we explore that, as we figure out what it means for your life, what it means for the church as well. So we are excited for you to be here again for another episode.
Well, I'll just jump in. I forget which, but I'm home. As far as what's happening, we are over our kids had a 2-week break. And if our listeners have kind of been listening acutely prior to that, not only did we have a 2-week fall break now, which you're hearing for the first time, but you throw in the fire evacuations of the several weeks prior to that, off and on, off and on. And boy, they've had a disruptive school workload for a while, which they're fine with, but I'm annoyed about. But they're back to school. That's great. The organization I serve, 1517, we had our national conference last week in San Diego. So we went to suffer for Jesus in beautiful San Diego, a rather okay place to be. So between 400 or 500 people there. I haven't heard the final count. Just lovely folks. The theme of this last one was long live the church. Long live the church. And why is the church long lived? Because Christ is faithful and his gospel is present and it's on our lips to each other and to our neighbors. And as long as this is true, particularly the faithfulness of Christ and his gospel, the church will live. So it was a fun topic. Great presenters. It went from kind of cruddy weather to great weather, and now we're home. In the midst of all that, our 15-year-old is trying to get in a lot of his student driving hours. So he and I have been driving a lot up and down the mountain together, listening to some Bitcoin podcasts where my favorite words out of his mouth are, but wait. And I hit pause real quick on the screen because he's driving. We're listening. I hit pause, and I tell you, he's been asking such great questions. I'm really heartened by it. And of course, just like with this podcast, but even more so in person, the effort of trying to explain these things to somebody else and do it simply and clearly and winsomely is of great personal benefit. But I'm also just impressed by his curiosity. So that's son number 3. The others are great too, but recently I've just been getting more time with him. That's kind of news in our neck of the woods. How about you, Jared? How's your family?
Things are well. Kids are growing big still. I feel like I say that every month, but every week, every couple of weeks, it's still true. They're getting bigger. Emily cut Silas's hair today and was so sad because my hair, I don't have much, but it's getting long enough where it needs to get cut. I don't know if you can see that or not. But we use a 1 on mine, and she cut Silas with a 4, thinking, oh, that's really long, 4 times as much. And she said, quote to me, it looks like he has no hair. And Zoe said, he looks like a bad guy now. So poor mom cutting Silas's hair too short. But I think the biggest thing in my life here is it's been a humbling week and a half or so for me, just kind of a lot of wrestling with the soul. Said to one of my friends this morning, actually, as we were talking on the phone, that I feel like I'm being sifted in some ways, that certain things that feel like are who I am and how people perceive me, all those sort of things now are being sort of tested and maybe even said, God's trying to tell me, hey, this is not who you are. This is not the most important sort of thing. So it's been humbling in that way, but I also trust and believe that God is at work doing his stuff, and that even if it's not comfortable and or enjoyable, that there's reason for it too behind all that sort of stuff. So a good but humbling sort of couple of weeks here, and looking forward to maybe what might come for that. Looking for the resolution. I'm not one who likes to sit with problems long, as I'm sure all of us can relate. And so I'm waiting for that. What is next? What does that mean? How am I supposed to live into this sort of thing?
The topic we're tossing around is talking amongst each other and with you, our listeners, about the Bitcoin 4-year cycle. We've mentioned that before, that every 4 years, the issuance of new Bitcoin into the market, the greater market, through the means of mining gets cut in half. The Bitcoin reward or subsidy gets cut in half. But that leads to this whole rhythm that happens every 4 years, roughly speaking. It's always a little bit different, each one. but it follows a rhythm. And in some recent conversations with some friends who have finally gotten curious about Bitcoin, when I mentioned that, they're like, whoa, time out, slow down. Tell me about this 4-year cycle. So that's probably next time. This time, a cultural good landed that we're looking to talk about. I didn't pay attention to the name of the episode. I should have, but there is this children's cartoon series, um, probably most well known amongst homeschool families, I think, from what I know, but also just known by other people who are looking for good stuff for their kids to watch, called the Tuttle Twins. I'm curious, Jared, does your family watch the Tuttle Twins apart from this particular episode on Bitcoin?
No, I think they're maybe a couple years sort of early for that.
Yeah,
Like a lot. So we're one of those families that wants to not expose our kids to like fast moving screens sort of thing. So like slow action, not a lot of scene changes. And this is like going all crazy all over the place. So a couple more years and even phrases and words that maybe we don't want our 3-year-old to be parroting back to us and or her friends or her playmates at school.
sure. That seems fair. Even as a question came out of my mouth, I thought, yeah, I bet Jared and Emily's kiddos are just a little young for this for sure. But the premise of the Tuttle Twins, like everything, it certainly is meant to be entertaining, engaging, so that the kids enjoy it, but then also maybe want to watch it again, right? But they are looking to be truly educational. And I suppose all media ultimately is educational. Somebody's selling you a message, this type of thing. But with the Tuttle Twins, it's typically not subtle whatsoever. And they're trying to clue you in on something, a reality, and then truly teach you around it. So I first heard of the Tuttle Twins because they've had some past episodes on economics. You know, you're talking about for kids. I don't know what the age range is here, but I'm going to guess their sweet spot is something like ages 5 to 10 or 6 to 12, something like this. So they've done some, you could say it, topical topics adjacent to Bitcoin, but now they have released an episode on Bitcoin. So you're talking a 22-minute episode on Bitcoin. That's the Tuttle Twins. It is pretty fast moving action. That's true. There's kind of silliness abounds, like with cartoons. I'm not as into the cartoon scene as I once was. I hear about a lot of actually high quality cartoons for kids these days, maybe even more than my own had. I don't know. Do your kids have any favorites there, Jared?
We really like Daniel Tiger still, as much as my daughter might not be as into Daniel Tiger anymore, just the teaching and the lessons that takes. But then also, I mean, she is a girl and she's 3 years old, so you can bet that she loves Frozen as much as as her dad, might despise the messages of let it go and love is an open door. So forget all the pain of the past. We're unburdened by all that sort of stuff. She loves it
There you
and she
go.
sings it day in and day out. So, yes, we love cartoons. She lives and breathes them in many ways.
Yeah, there you go. I hear about, is it Bluey is a cartoon?
Oh, right. How could I
I
forget
wondered.
Bluey? The Australian dog, right? Bluey Bingo, Mom and Dad Healer. Those are very short. So like 5-minute episodes sort of thing.
Okay.
Very, very short, no breaks from them really, but so there are entertaining Bluey and educational Bluey and everywhere in between. But a fun show too that she loves to watch. But like you said, media has a message usually of some sort that it's trying to communicate and get kids to see.
Yeah. So if with my children ranging from age 14 to 20, we talk about matters, and in particular, we talk about economic matters. We talk about theological matters a lot. Don't try not to take that for granted. I'm sure I do at times, but we talk about Sunday service. We talk about text. We talk about other things happening. We talk about the faith at the table. We do that, but we also talk economics at the table, which is something I don't really much remember doing as a teenager. For my kids, it's not maybe because they wanted that or signed up for it. It's because dad, I've gotten into Bitcoin, and it's just changed how I look at the world and what's happening around me, including the headlines. So now I see a lot of the headlines happening in the world around us tied to the money, tied to fiat, tied to national use of money, taxes, expenditures, fiat money, the printing of money. All these things are related to many, many headlines out there. And so, yeah, with our kids, we talk about these things. And as much as I tell you, I'm proud to be having a conversation with my 15-year-old in the car about Bitcoin. Here we've now got the Tuttle Twins. And I've got to say, having watched this episode now twice, they have created something that I think will bring up economic realities and conversations with a younger group of children still. And the three of us can't quite fully test this out. We don't have any kids in that range above yours, Jared, and below our kids or below the Haupt children either. But that seems to be the sweet spot that these Tuttle Twins are aiming for. And so we watch it. And so we're going to talk to you about this episode. Having said that, all three of us are pastors or have been active pastors in the past, Ben and I. And oftentimes, one thing that's a portion of pastor life is the children's sermon. Do you give children's sermons, Jared?
It's a weird thing. So we don't do them every
Right.
week, and there's not really a rhythm or a reason why we do them. But when we do them, we do them, and when we don't, we don't, which might sound like obviously you either do or you don't. But I like them. I think they're great to do, and I think the the reason I like them might not be the way and the reason why people might think.
Okay, what is the reason then?
Right. Is that a good enough bait for you? So maybe this leads into our episode, but to me, the reason why I like a children's message is because if you're going to do it right, it means you're not going to use an object in the sense of Jesus is like a water bottle, because children don't know how to do that sort of reasoning. But nevertheless, the reason why I like them is because it's a challenge for me to take a really big idea that I'm going to spend 15, 18 minutes with here at least, and try and boil it down into 2 or 3 minutes. Where now, I mean, the majority of kids that are our children's messages are about Zoe's age and maybe a year or two older. So we don't have like 8-year olds coming up to children's. This is like 3 to 5 year
Yeah.
olds coming up for a children's message. Okay, talk to me about how I'm supposed to have the attitude to serve Jesus as a 3-year old. Talk about a difficult task. So I just purely love them for the challenge that they create for me as the preacher to take big adulty, disciple-y of Jesus topic, but boil it down into something that a 3-year old can say, okay, pastor says, be like Jesus. You say, be like Jesus. And that is something that then maybe they can take home and tell their parents or live out during the week. That is to me what makes children's good ones anyway a challenge, and the primary reason why I enjoy them.
There you go. Yeah, I'd once heard, and there's different, I suppose, philosophies or even theologies as to what one is aiming to do in a children's message. But I'd once heard a good children's message teaches adults one good thing. And I was kind of thought that was hilarious. But I also aimed to do the children's messages in such a way where I would explicitly at the end, or I'd say to the kids and to the church, and kids, when you go home tonight, mom and dad are going to continue to talk with you about this at the dinner table tonight, right? The idea that, yes, hopefully we have taught the faith that much more to their parents to continue the conversation with their children. So, yeah, back to this. It seems to me the Tuttle Twins, these cartoons are maybe aiming to do something similar. It's great if they get through to the kids, but they want to be a cultural good of the caliber such that if mom and dad actually watch an episode with the kids or overhear it, they're hearing the education taking place. They're maybe picking up things themselves and continuing a conversation later. My test for this is I watched this episode once and then I listened to it at like 1.75 speed a second time. And good children's entertainment can satisfy the adult ear, is what I would suggest to you. I found this out way back in the day, driving the minivan, the DVD player back. Some of the kids' movies were just drivel as the audio for the movies came from the back of the vehicle to the front. And others, like the Lego movie, which is probably older now than I know, is actually just even still amazing if you can only listen to it and not even see it. But yeah, something like that's happening here with the Tuttle Twins. And so, Jared, you watched it as well. How should we start? Do we just kind of launch in, kind of take this episode a bit sequentially, tell the storyline, or what do you think?
I'd be curious, since we've both seen it, what what would you say sort of is the good takeaway? Because I think all good sort of children's messages
There you
too.
go.
Have like one tweetable, whatever it's called now, Xable, postable sort of thought, and then let's sort of go from there. See what if we get the same thing. If not, great. Then we'll talk about why and all those sort of things.
I think the takeaway, there's a song, they break out in song in the middle of this, and the refrain of the song is probably the organizing principle for the whole episode. And it's this. And actually it's kind of wonderful for us to just say it out loud here because it sounds a little bit counterintuitive. And that's going to cause us to dig into it. It caused the kids to dig into it. So I think it was this, the refrain of the song, which was when money is controlled, money is corrupted.
Yep. Same here. I mean that, and to me, that's a sign that this is a good show from an educational standpoint, right? That it is built around one sole idea, and then everything else before it, everything else after it serves the point and the goal of that message, which is just like good communication in general, right? It's a here's a good preaching thing, right? What's your focus? What's your function? Whatever structure you're going to use, it all needs to serve in preaching. It all needs to serve to do those things, right? We don't want to do 10 things in a sermon. We want to do one thing. We don't want to say 10 things. We want to say one thing. And everything that we do then goes around and into that point. So as I hear you say that, when I think about it too, that's the same place that I went. When cash or money is controlled, money is corrupted, and it's got this nice little jingle. I don't. Can you hear it in your head right now, David?
I'm tempted to try singing it, but not only might not do it justice, but I might embarrass myself. But yeah, it is a full on jingle. When money is controlled, money is corrupted. Of course, you want to, and that's why I say it's counterintuitive. You hear that, you say, well, what are you suggesting? That money be uncontrolled? I mean, that sounds scary, right? That sounds scary. That's too much freedom of some weird kind. We can't just let the money fly like that. It's got to be controlled, right? So that's how I think how we would probably typically cognitively object to it, or just have a hiccup when we hear that refrain. But now the whole episode is built with that. I'll say this though, that's not where they start with the episode. They start, I forget how, somehow Bitcoin is mentioned superficially, and one of the kid characters says my I forget if it's my dad or my uncle or somebody. My dad,
My uncle Jamie.
my uncle Jamie, there it is. My uncle Jamie says Bitcoin is a pet rock. All right, and they come back to that a couple times. So I've kind of found it interesting. They start with what has been thrown around in the Bitcoin world, although I think this language exists well outside of Bitcoin world, but they FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt. They start with like an accusation, probably born of doubt more than anything else. How could money be anything when we all know it's just a pet rock, right? So they start with that. But my uncle Jamie says Bitcoin is a pet rock. That's the starting point of this episode. And so you've got one child already objecting to it, the others seemingly getting it. And now where will they go from here? Will they be at odds, or will one prevail over the other in terms of, kind of sound education and sharing the goods? Does that sound about right there, Jared?
Right. And I think this is where it's one of those shows that if you're in the Bitcoin world, there are so many little like we call them Easter eggs or like references, right? So who is Uncle Jamie? It's supposed to be Jamie Dimon, right? And so when you see Uncle Jamie playing with his
Nice.
pet rocks, he looks exactly like Jamie Dimon does. So even just like little pokes and prods here and there are humorous maybe for us as adults to watch them. But I think the reason why it's important you sort of name what they're dealing with is they're setting up the problem, right? So again, I don't know why I keep going back to children's sermons, but back to a children's sermon or a sermon in general, you want to set up a problem, right? You want to create a need for someone to listen to this story. And so the first thing they do is sort of paint that, well, it doesn't matter. But then if I remember right, the second place they go to is the grocery store. And to me, this is like a, hey, we talked to Zoe about groceries and things like that. I mean, we just got the Walmart and the Amazon Christmas magazine that they send out, and she's 3. I just can't believe the materialisticness in her is absolutely insane. we had the Walmart magazine for 2 days maybe before we threw it away. It was like this is not good for you. It is creating covetousness in your heart. And so even in the Amazon one that we got, we're trying to like get her to say, hey, what what do you think your friends want? But then even then it's like she said, I want to get rid of all my toys and buy new ones. And so, just like you're having conversations with your teenagers, I'm trying to tell my 3-year-old, well, we don't have enough money to buy all of those toys again, right? That
Right?
that those aren't free, that we can't just get them. And so they're going in this episode, they go to the grocery store, and I don't quite understand. Maybe I looked away or something like that, but they're doing this like grocery timed thing, right? And so they run around the store, and there's fun, fast music, and they're trying to race to who can get the stuff the fastest. And then they get to the checkout line, and they begin to scan all of their stuff. And there's a bunch of other funny little things about like seed oils, which is a Bitcoin sort of thing, and processed sugar, also a sort of a Bitcoin thing there. But then they get to $100, and both of the kids are like, "What? We're already at
Yeah.
$100?" Can we just talk about first the fact that like that's the standard of what's a lot? I mean, that's crazy. But that's kind of the continuation of the problem, right? That even and this is, I think an 8-year-old could probably understand that. Like $100 to an 8-year-old probably feels like 1,000 or $10,000 to an adult. And so to say to an 8-year-old, those snacks that you bought for your movie night, you already have spent $100, creates sort of this, whoa, what's going on? Why are things costing so much more? Why is everything so much more expensive?
Right. And I can confirm, I can see my kids in this last year. The youngest son got his first job. He was working with his brothers this summer, rather, at a boat dock. So two things happened. One is he had the age old shock, which every kid has, this discrepancy between how many hours they worked and their actual take home pay. And what is the discrepancy caused by? It's caused by the taxes, right? And even then, you're like, kid, I wish I was taxed at that low of a bracket. I wish. He's like, really, Dad? You get taxed more? Oh yeah. So that's one aha. But all four of my children in past years, and they're older than 8 years old, right? So probably starting at age 10, 11, 12 in the last 2, 3, 4 years, and then going up in age, they have seen prices go up in a way that's noticeable to them. They see it at the cash register, so to speak. They see it when they want to go out with friends for a cheap snack on a Friday night at Taco Bell. And it's not so cheap anymore, right? And Taco Bell's still the cheapest of all the options. They see it when they've wanted to go to McDonald's or whatever. So I think that it's really fascinating. I don't remember Jared or Ben. I think Ben's back with us, maybe hearing this. I don't remember a time in my youth. I remember being shocked by taxes, but not by price increases, not by inflation itself.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Not anything that I've even remotely considered, which maybe says more about the sort of privilege I had as a kid growing up in a middle class family, but not anything my parents ever talked to me about or I really ever observed.
Yeah. So back to our storyline. Bitcoin is a pet rock. And maybe that even came after the grocery. I apologize, but that seems to be an issue, right? That's an issue. Just pet rocks aren't good for anything. I missed the whole Jamie Dimon thing. That's brilliant. By the way, there's a pet rock later on in the episode, very overtly. This pet rock's name is a granite Yellen, like Janet Yellen, and it looks just like her. So yeah, they've been playing with this all throughout the episode. But inflation now is the real problem. And can Bitcoin be an answer to it? And the initial answer is no. My uncle Jamie tells me it's just a pet rock. And now the other kids on this journey, kind of this cyberspace journey that they're all going to take, which lands them on a beach in El Salvador. Well, those who have ears to hear know that in El Salvador on a beach, and they even name it, is a beach called Bitcoin Beach, where all up and down the beach and in town there, everything being paid for in Bitcoin. And that preceded the fact that 3 years ago now, El Salvador took on Bitcoin as one of their currencies, one of their two accepted currencies. So They're whisked away by the magic of cartoons and the supposed magic within the cartoon of some sort of time travel through cyberspace to where they land in Bitcoin Beach. And now the education begins on Bitcoin. And is it just a pet rock, or is it something else? Does that seem like we've queued it up pretty well, Jared?
Absolutely. Keep going.
All right, we'll keep going. I think soon hereafter we're introduced to a new character, and this won't surprise you. The new character's name is Biddy. Biddy is a Bitcoin. That's where the kids are first educated that there's more than just Biddy. There's more biddies out there, but there's not an infinite number of biddies. The Biddy they're introduced to, the Bitcoin name Biddy, is one of 21 million. So they're introduced to that. They don't really go into absolute scarcity at this point. They don't belabor that. They must keep trucking. It's a 22-minute episode, and they're trying to teach one thing and not all the things, but they've introduced it. One of 21 million. And now the jingle begins that we thought was the organizing principle for the whole thing. And again, at the center of that jingle is when money is controlled, money is corrupted. There's other lyrics in there talking about the history of money, and they don't say the US dollar, but really they're talking about the US dollar and the original history of most Western currencies, or modern currencies is probably better put, that they used to be backed by gold, and now they're not, okay? And the second they came off gold standards, now they're up for corruption. And they ask this question in the song. When needs arise, when the emergencies arise, I'm sorry, they tax you also, but they ask this question: what if they could secretly tax you behind your back? What if they could secretly tax you behind your back? And they connect that with money that is controlled. The money that is controlled is the US dollar. Now, I'm going to guess, Jared, taking a pause right there. I mean, I knew the US dollar was the US dollar. I knew it wasn't. I knew it wasn't the currency of other nations, but I gotta say, in my youth, up through my late 30s, early 40s, when I started studying these things, I still didn't think of the US dollar as being something that was controlled. I just thought of it as something that was or is, right? But didn't think of it as
Yeah.
something that was controlled. Boy, do I think differently about it now, right?
Right. Right. Absolutely. I mean, uh, I think the sort of planting of seed maybe is a good, like, because I'll be honest, I have no idea what the song was about. I don't remember any of the lyrics other than that little jingle.
Yeah,
And in some ways, like that's good, right? It's kind of the like, hey, Pastor, I don't remember what you said, but I do remember that story you told. And maybe we might say that's not super helpful, but or it's a, hey, I remember the one line you said about this thing. And then maybe it causes me to go back and to remember or to want to rewatch or re-listen to that. But absolutely, I mean, I would say that by and large, I don't think I thought too much even about money itself. Like, where'd it come from? Why is it this way? Even like investing wasn't, I don't know, like, why should I be concerned about that? Just put it in your retirement account and it magically does whatever you need to do. And, you don't need to worry about anything else, sort of thing, which is incredibly naive looking back, that's how I thought it worked. But in some ways, I think what this episode is trying to sort of push you to see is that, well, yeah, that's what they want you to think. They want you to think that it's not controlled, or they don't want you to think too deeply about the fact that it is controlled.
absolutely. Absolutely. And they go on to start giving examples of it. Very big ideas, maybe even ideas that could be contended with. And of course, they're giving them and moving them on immediately. Ideas that people are writing PhDs about to this day, I'm certain. But they go on to sing about and share in the script about how money used to be backed by gold. They move on from that. They said when nations needed to go to war, it was essentially to actually protect the nation, and they would tax the citizens with a war tax, and the citizens would be willing to pay that tax if the war was worth fighting for. I've got to tell you, I this is not the first time I've heard this. I've now heard this many times and read about it over past years. It's wild that within the last 5 years this was new to me. It's wild. Why? Because I'm so used to living where the government can sort of just spend, 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 and I don't ask where that money comes from. I don't ask where it comes from. If my kids have an idea for spending for something, which is all the time, so it's just beginning for Jared, right? They saw the cat, his daughter saw the catalog. Oh, it's just beginning, buddy, right? We're up to, not just clothes that are expensive, shoes that are expensive, but vehicles. I want a vehicle, right? And all thoughts on these. Every desire of their heart becomes more and more expensive over time. What's the first question we're asking them as mom and dad? So where is this money coming from? Right? We do that right away. And the
That's
same would
right.
be true for us. We, for the first time in our marriage, 21 years of marriage, first time in my life, 47 years old, first time ever we purchased a new car. A lot of wringing of the hands went into that. We've done it now. We've done the deed. I love the vehicle. I hate the payment, all of that. But we had to ask ourselves very distinctly, where does the money come from? It seems that is a part-time discussion for the U.S. government, as a for instance, when it comes to spending money. Sometimes we ask that, particularly if Republicans want to spend it on something, the Democrats say, where's that coming from, and vice versa. So we spit across the aisle at each other. But when push comes to shove and we come down to it, we're spending money as a nation on things all the time where we have not sufficiently asked the question, where is this money coming from? Rather, we're printing it in such a way that we're increasing the total money supply. And when we do that, to use the words of the song, what if they could secretly tax you behind your back? The printing of money, according to the Tuttle Twins kids cartoon episode, the printing of money is a secret, stealthy, stupid, terrible, rotten, no good tax. And maybe I should stop there. I will stop there almost, except for later on in the episode, they share a statistic that I believe is true. In the last 10 years, our dollars have lost 49% of their purchasing power through inflation. It's crazy. It took us over 200 years to go into $12 trillion of deficit. Now, in the last 5 years, we've done another 12 trillion. Over 200 years, 12 trillion, and now the last 5 years, 12 trillion. And when we're flooding the marketplace with fresh dollars, that ends up deflating the purchasing power of our dollars, inflating, this is how we see it real time, inflating the cost of groceries, and therefore reducing the value of our dollars by upwards of 49% in 10 years. This, Jared, I'm like almost pinching myself now. This doesn't sound like a kid's stuff anymore. It
Right.
sounds like a strange belief to suggest to our hearers that this was on a kid's cartoon.
I mean, obviously, we're diving deeper into all of those things, but I think so in the song, I think after they talk about that, they say something like, and if the war went too long or they didn't like it, they would like riot or revolt or sort of say, "Hey, you need to stop this," right?
When the citizens were
And
actively
it's
taxed for the war, right? Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right, right. When they actually had to pay for it, and with their tax dollars, it was like, "Hey, I don't like this anymore. Please stop." Whereas now they don't have, I mean, we can do that, but they can say, too bad, we're still going to do this sort of thing.
yep.
And I think at least so sort of a first already, let's talk about how do we tie this in. I think this is again another great example. I mean, it seems like one of our goals here is to try and give deeper meaning and reason for why Bitcoin and why, especially for Christians, for followers of Jesus, why Bitcoin. I think this is one that we've done a little bit on, but maybe not a whole bunch. That in a really weird way, could Bitcoin incentivize people to not go to war? Because that would mean in a Bitcoin world, they would have to truly tax people to be able to go to war to fight against people. And I don't know about you, but I'm not standing in line with the government saying, please take my money to go murder someone across the world. No, thank you. Uh, but in a Bitcoin world, that is likely going to force people to be more involved, to care more about what our government is doing. And then I think it's a pretty convincing argument to say, hey, if this is true, then there might actually be less war in the world. Now, of course, sin and all those things that we've talked about are still true, but nevertheless, a Bitcoin world where a government truly has to pay for it by taxing its people, they're going to have to actually think twice and get people's buy-in
Yep.
before they go and do something like this, which again has nothing to do with price, has nothing to do with how many purchasing power you have, but is simply a result of a Bitcoin world that we might even appreciate as followers of Jesus too.
Yeah, yeah. Plenty of wars that it wouldn't do away with, such as the war of words between individuals, which is probably the majority of wars, so to speak, right? Between siblings, spouses, friends, family, that type of thing. There's plenty of war still in the human heart, right? Because of our sinful, nasty hearts, mine included. So there's plenty there to be confessed of and to talk about, probably in a different conversation. But yes, in terms of
Right.
sovereign wars, nation to nation, it puts the consequences back into the moment and not the future. Because right now,
Hmm.
as we're printing money for wars and skirmishes and the like, inflating the money supply, everything's always downstream. Yeah, downstream, 12 to 16 to 24 months, prices will slowly go up, but the ultimate cost is being put on other people further down the line, or myself way later in life. And those consequences, you feel like you can keep pushing them down the road, but eventually they'll come back to haunt you, and it would be no good. Yeah, I mean, fascinating. Introducing these topics
Right.
to children with parents hopefully watching or in the room listening as well, kind of leaning in themselves and saying, "I've never heard that before. I want to know more about that." I don't know. I'm delighting in this that
Right.
somebody.
I mean, and even we're spending so much time on this, but I mean, this is like a singular line,
It's
right? I
true.
mean, we're like we're really reading into this. Just so if you've never seen
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
we are really dissecting it here. But nevertheless, still like they're dropping all these sort of things like, hey, here's the problem, and here's all the things
yeah.
that are a result of that problem to try and sort of set you up for the solution that it's going to offer on. So, David, keep
Yeah,
pulling us along. What happens
in fact, the
next?
pet rock girl says, "But if you're saying let's go to some money that you can't control, what about terrorists?" And the response is, "Yes, we need to stop terrorists, but," and this is the question. I think I have the quote down. What if they, the government, determine the terrorist is you? And then they go on to tell the story of the trucker protest in in Canada back during COVID time. If you watch that, people went, they were annoying as all get out because they fouled up the traffic patterns, not only on the transcontinental highway headed towards, was it Ottawa that they went to, or Quebec City? Anyways, they headed out east in Canada. Our Canadian listeners, all one or two of you will have to correct me on this. But anyways, they parked their trucks. They stopped business in the city center. It was a peaceful protest. It was well ordered, it was peaceful, it was not violent, and these people had their assets not just frozen momentarily, but they had bank accounts frozen and drained, right? And they were deemed to be, and the powers to do this were grabbed because of like anti-terrorist powers, right? Which is to say, they were
Hmm.
deemed ultimately as terrorists. The citizens were. So this is not over dramatizing. This sort of thing has happened here in the West. In fact, in our Canadian North from us here. What if they, the government, determined that the terrorist is you? That's the question. Well, now we have to go on to say, all of that is to say, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem with the dollar. And that is the starting point. To the Christian faith, maybe in this way, is similar. Jesus says the sick, I'm sorry, the healthy have no need for a physician, but only the sick, right? And those who live, if you do live in all ways that are good to live, you also don't need a Lord of life who raises you up to new life. But we would say in our Christian faith, first of all, Christianity looks at humanity and doesn't have many flattering things to say. We are sinful, we are corrupt, it's not good news for us. We are dead in our trespasses, even. and dead men don't raise themselves, right? So first you start with the bad news, if you're willing to bear it and look into it, and it's not easy to do, but you look at the bad news, and only if you know there's bad news out there and it applies to you, are you prepared for good news. They sort of do something like this, and this is true of us as well. I probably have zero standing to talk with friends or family or listeners here about Bitcoin if they think everything is just wonderful in US dollar land, in fiat world. If they think everything's going swimmingly well, we've got nothing to talk about, really. So
Mm,
that's really the kind of the path they've now done through this song, where money is controlled, money is corrupted. They give several instances of this, from war to the trucker protest and the like. They haven't exhausted all of them. One more big one's coming at the end. But now they're ready to talk about Bitcoin. And the girl says, so what are we talking about here? Cryptocurrencies? And the answer is no. And I love very succinctly, they say the problem with many, 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 if not most cryptocurrencies is that they are also controlled systems. There is a founder. The founder is still around. The founder and his friends pre-mined a bunch of this. So as it does in a bubble become worth something, the founder and their close compatriots have a whole bunch of it that they can sell real quickly. And we call it pump and dump schemes. Also, the founders typically on a lot of these cryptocurrencies, they do not have a fixed supply. They say, yeah, for right now, there's 10 million coins. But we'll see down the line. They can print more coins all the time. And where money is controlled, money is corrupted. So we're not talking about cryptocurrencies. We're talking about the OG, the original cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. And they go on to say it's decentralized. And we've used that word a lot. I realize, Jared, you, me, and Ben, decentralized. But I think they give a really great tagline after saying it's decentralized. They say this: it's decentralized. No one singular group controls it. There's still a lot of inputs into Bitcoin world. Bitcoin does admittedly rise and fall based on usage of lots of individuals, a huge collective. But notice we're from different nations around the world. Maybe we're into Bitcoin for different reasons, but ultimately it is a decentralized system in this. No one group controls it. That is a huge splash philosophically about Bitcoin, and actually a huge splash in this little 22-minute episode on Bitcoin. I'll stop there and hand it to you, Jared. Anything?
I think we got to get to the next part, the sort of if this is all true, and then what does this mean?
We are citizens of this nation and yet citizens of a greater nation. We can conceive of that in a way that maybe is the way we think of money. Because typically our challenge with money is to think of money not being tied to a nation, right? We're so used to it being issued by our government that we think of
I
that.
think in some ways it's like a universal, it's like it means the universal church around the earth, right? I mean, even in the episode, they're not talking about, I mean, they're talking about the dollar because it's a US sort of based thing, but it applies to any other currency too. And so what is Bitcoin, right? We usually use the word like a global decentralized ledger, a global settlement layer. I mean, usually the words global are in that sentence. And if I've said this already here, forgive me, but my brother and his wife went over to Europe for a couple of weeks, and it was amazing hearing the story of interaction they had at an ATM. Like there were two options. You could either get cash back in or pay for something like in the local currency and have your credit card do the sort of like conversion ratio for you on the back end, or like pay for that transaction in United States dollars itself. And and like somehow they were going to accept both. And they said that when they did that, when they like paid for it with the US dollar, there was like a $20 charge, like $20, not even just the currency exchange fee. And so, as someone who doesn't really pay much outside of the United States, it just floored me like, wow, that's amazing. Like, we really do need something that is global, that you can settle between someone who lives in Europe, someone who lives in the United States, that it doesn't matter where you're from, that if I want to send money to a missionary in Argentina, Ben, where you're going, that I can do that cheaply and instantly, that I don't need to go through a bank or some third party person who's going to take their haircut like that. I've never quite seen it that clear that we need something that is not controlled, right? That's not corrupted. Because that, I mean, what is that? We call it fees, but I think we could use the language of that is stealing in some ways.
Well, what you're describing is one corruption, which is what the government can do real time behind our backs with the currency that is the currency for our everyday life, money for everyday life. That's one. But once you get a controlled currency that is corrupted, the corruption rolls on. I mean, that's what I'm hearing you say. They're getting away with
Right.
exorbitant fees, right? Because what other choice did your brother have? Very few is the answer. Or maybe there was another one, but very few. And so for expediency, he took a huge hit, which normally he wouldn't. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Absolutely. All right, I'm going to continue on in this. The big takeaway next in this episode, and we're honestly nearing through to the end, is they say now they're rolling it all back to inflation. So all the corruption, the corruption you see with governments, with fiat money, is always more money. It's not less. They typically do not pull money out of the system. We just tried for a brief few months to do that as a nation with quantitative tightening,
Mhm.
and it lasted such a very short amount of time. And already in the few days and weeks since now we're easing again, the easing has let out more sales, so to speak, than the tightening pulled in. So that happens. So the corruption is always in one direction to more and more money, right? And we'll even maybe hear a little bit about that later. But they go on to say inflation can't steal from Bitcoin. Biddy as being one of 21 million. I'll remind our listeners, whereas the US dollar can be divided out to two decimal points, places behind any given single dollar, Bitcoin can go out to 8 decimal places behind. So it's really granular. It can be divided very minutely. And so there's 21 million total, but you can get fine small amounts of Bitcoin. You can buy it, you can use it. It's kind of future proof in that way, or at least forward looking in that way. But inflation can't ultimately steal from Bitcoin. Whatever proportion of you have of the total 21 million Bitcoin. So inflation can't steal from Bitcoin. They go from that, and now basically the girl says, well, why can't the government essentially do its own crypto? And the answer is this technology exists and it's being developed right now. And if you want to talk about controlled money, the controlled money we have now, the US dollar, is nothing like this central bank digital currency, a CBDC, would be. Because with a central bank digital currency, they can control not only the supply of dollars, but they can control where you spend it. They could say, let's say, I don't know, an absurd example. What would that be? They say,
I
David
don't know.
Rucker.
You can't spend money here. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
you can
just
spend money
simple
here.
as that. Like, you've already bought your one piece of meat for the week, and so you need to wait until next week to buy more. Sorry.
Yeah, picking on my boys. You've already had too much Taco Bell this week, right? You're done. You need to spread those dollars around. That's absurd. But consider this: the country with the most advanced CBDC program, and Western hearers should hear this. U.S. Canadian hearers should hear this. The country with the most advanced program is China for their CBDCs. And so tell me, please, dear listener, is China known for its freedom technologies when it comes to its citizens, or just the opposite? And I suggest to you it's just the opposite. In fact, China is one of those places where the nation has people as opposed to people, we the people, having a government or a form of government. So, and the CBDCs really attest to that or are congruent with that because they can really control the citizenry if you have CBDCs. And then, so all of this is to say, we've got a problem, inflation, Bitcoin's a pet rock. Well, really? Have you considered what happens with controlled money? Controlled money is corrupted, and they give good examples of that. leading back to some positive attributes of Bitcoin, that it can't be controlled in those same ways, that it can't be diluted with inflation in the same way as fiat money can be and actively is. But then they go on to say, well, why not have the government invent something like Bitcoin? Well, that would be controlled money all the more. That would be putting the accelerator on controlled money. And then come back to Bitcoin. We're getting to that part of the episode where Bitcoin is being offered as a great help, a better tool. And it's here, if you've listened to our past episodes, that me sharing with you that I loved something then they said. I love it, and I admire the writers for getting this and offering it to the kids and to us. They say, this just won't surprise you. They say, uncontrolled money won't solve all the world's problems. God bless him for saying that, because the meme, and it's very memorable, is "fix the money, fix the world," right? And we had a whole episode where I think we all landed there pretty much. But I know I feel very strongly for this. Better money for a better world, I think, is much more faithful to my understanding of what could take place under Bitcoin. And theologically, it's a lot better. But they even suggest that uncontrolled money won't solve all the world's problems. Having brought us this far, now our characters turn towards the one character who still is dismissive of Bitcoin, and they set up what Jared told me off to the side is his favorite part of the episode. So, Jared, can I send it to you to share what
Yeah,
happened?
we'll see how much this is like a great test. Like I watched this 20-minute episode once, and now I'm gonna try and sort of recount it. So if we're following the track of the message right, okay, here's this thing, here's some problems, here's why you might need to care about it. Okay, here's some things that people say about it. But to me, this is now into if we're making the children's message, here is the example, if you will, or a kind of a counter example, right? So prove it to me, if you will. And so they turn to this rock. Is this when they talk about Janet Yellen? I don't think
Yes.
so.
Yep.
But okay, good. So this is the Janet Yellen joke here. But they turn to her and say, "Hey, do you think you could control the money for us?" And this sweet little innocent rock says, "Oh, of course I could control the money." And so everything starts out great, but then what happens as people come to her, they request from her money for various things. And it's quite humorous. She just takes a scissors and a piece of paper and just cuts up more dollar bills and gives them to people. But then I forget what happens exactly. Eventually, they make their way back, and they turn and find this town that this person is controlling the currency in, and it is a mess. There are riots. There are people screaming and yelling at the front steps of the bank. Give
Rocks.
us
Pet rocks.
more.
These are all pet
Yeah, pet
rocks.
rocks.
Yeah.
Right, right. This is like a rock show. Quite literally. Oh, yes, and then there's the joke about Rolling Stone. Anyway, so they're all demanding more money, right, for them to be printed to be given to, and the little rock they see cuts to the scene, and she's like on the inside with all of her money all spread all over the place that she's cut and printed, and basically they ask her, "What on earth happened? What did you do? We thought we could trust you to maintain, to control the currency, to control everything." And she says something like, "Well, there was an emergency," right? And that all these problems, well, this person needed something, and so did this person. And everything was an emergency
Yep.
that she had to do this sort of thing. Like she had no choice to do it. And as the person who controlled it, she had to give in, if you will, even to these people's demands. And when I watch it, why I love it, why it's my favorite part, is that when we're trying to talk about why, when money is controlled, money is corrupted, because, like we have said over and over again here, what's the problem with us people? Is that, well, we are sinful, broken people who usually look out for us number one, right? And so, to me, the point they're trying to make is that when you look at someone who is supposed to be in control, well, look, we don't know how to, or we can't, or we don't want to, we're unwilling, we're unable. Fill in the words that you want to there. We don't want to do the hard, necessary thing, right? And so instead of doing that, we just do what is easy, and we cut up those little papers and hand them out to more people because, well, it's an emergency, right? So whether it's COVID, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whatever it is, it's the emergency that's here, that's now, that we have to respond to, because if we don't, then the whole world will fall apart, all those sort of things. And so the whole point of it is both, hey, people being in control, obviously they can't do it, right? Because they're fallible. They cannot do the right thing, make the right choices all the time. But also that when you think about how is it controlled, it's about, hey, someone, we need to take people out, I think is what they're trying to push people to see, is that, hey, when there are people in control, this is not going to end well. And so we need to find a way to get people out of control of the money. And so then they cut to this beautiful scene, right, of a Bitcoin world where people are, I mean, it's kind of like this idealistic, I mean, it's pushing the message, right? So we can understand that it's not this simple that we just everyone adopt Bitcoin and all, and the world is a better place immediately. But as they show this, it's like all the riots are gone, all the people are better, everyone is so much more happy, that things are just in a much better place. And I love the way in which it is such a stark contrast, because I think that kids could understand that adults could understand that as they watch too, that they can see the sort of effects now that we've seen, the effects of inflation in the monetary supply. And so that it's not just this like crazy third world country sort of thing. Oh my goodness, people are rioting in the streets, they're demanding this and that. No, it's in America, right? I mean, we see this sort of division and the unrest and all those sort of things. And they're trying to offer to us, hey, maybe part of that problem has to do with the fact that money is controlled. It is then corrupted as well. So, did I do a good job? Because you
Oh,
just
yeah, it's
watched it
great.
again.
It's great. I mean, we pray, lead us not into temptation. Basically, that's what we're talking about. When it's controlled, when somebody's put in control, we're not necessarily even ascribing to anybody, bad motives heading into, a position, whether appointed or whether elected into that position. But temptations arise, and it's tempting to get us out of the momentary emergency and say we'll deal with the repercussions later. But eventually everything starts looking like an emergency, right? And we're pushing the problems way down the road, but eventually it is a snowball. It does get bigger. I can think beyond our Tuttle Twins episode here. I can think of two things. First of all, the forest fires here recently. Fact, we know that if we would allow forest fires to burn more frequently, there would always be less of a fuel load. They would burn through every few years. It'd be more at ground level. They wouldn't be these huge catastrophic conflagrations. But some of our stewardship of the last 50 years plus has led to, understories of dead, rotting, ready to combust fuel. And that's part of our terrible forest fires. So even in the natural world around us, we have some sort of analog to what we've done with the money system. But I also thought, as you were talking about this, we're looking at this episode, I literally thought of towards the end, right at the end of Dumb and Dumber. If you remember this movie from way, way back, Lloyd and whatever his name are, they're supposed to have the ransom money in a suitcase to get the girl, and they go and they open it up, and it's filled with IOUs because they got tempted. They spent the money on the ridiculous suits they were wearing, a nice hotel, all of this stuff. They got tempted, and they're like, but we're good for it. We're good for it. It's too much temptation for man. So can there be a way of conceiving of our money and our monetary policy where corruptible man is removed from it in a way? And that's part of Satoshi's genius. We could even see some sort of genius like that in the makeup of the United States, the three branches of government. Why did we do that? To decentralize the power, to decentralize it with the hope that being decentralized, it would not corrupt. Now, I think we can say this: it's in that case still corruptible, but it sure has taken a lot of time, right? It sure slowed us down. This breaking out, this decentralizing of the powers. Well, now don't just decentralize it over three branches. Decentralize the monetary policy amongst all the people who participate in it. That's some amazing decentralization there. Some truly amazing decentralization. Well, I think it's probably about time we do wrap this up. I think we're over an hour by now. We lost Ben, unfortunately, on the road. We'll get him back soon and take up some hopefully great topics sometime soon. I think we'll try and get in the show notes a link to where our listeners can go watch this for themselves. I'm just so impressed, though, that there's some folks out there trying to truly educate children on meaty things, and not in a sneaky way, like don't involve mom and dad, come off here to the side, let us whisper, lies in your ear, this type of thing, but kind of engaging for the whole family. As you pointed out, one more cartoon where the kids can get what they get, and there's a lot more happening on top of it that the parents can get. But wildly successful, I thought. Wildly successful episode on the part of the creator of these Tuttle Twins. Jared, I'll leave you with the last word, though.
Oh man. So I think when if we're trying to make a comparison here to a, children's message, right? So we've got our problem, we've got sort of the here's a possible solution. Well, let's look at the example again, and then they kind of come back full circle and say, hey, this is Bitcoin. This is why Bitcoin is good and a better money, et cetera, et cetera. There's a fun little ad in there too at the end. But I think what it does well is for us who know a lot, it does a lot of deep things rather quickly. But for someone who doesn't know a lot, it gives them a lot of rabbit holes to go down if it's an adult
Well
who's
put.
listening.
Well put.
And even maybe a kid too, that so much of the Bitcoin world is learning a brand new subculture, learning about a whole bunch of different things. Well, it's like, I had to watch it 5 times to catch all the things that they said. And in some ways, I'm sure that, well, maybe that's the point, that this isn't as simple like dollar bad, Bitcoin good, but that there's more than one reason why this is a good thing and a better thing that we would be interested in. So I think it was great. I think, if I remember right, David, I think this is actually their second episode. I hadn't scrolled through to try and find the first one yet, but I know I'm fairly certain there's a first one too that I'll have to go back and watch. I,
Okay.
I tried I tried to get my wife to watch this one with me, and I said, "Here, we're gonna watch this cartoon," and she said, "Is it about Bitcoin?" And I said, "Yeah, don't you want to watch it?" And she said, "No, not absolutely not. I don't want to watch this at the end of the day." But nevertheless, we'll put it in the show notes for people, and we'd be curious to hear maybe what you thought about it and what does it do well, and maybe if you're someone new to following along with us, what questions does it raise for you, right? As a, hey, does it say something about this that I've never thought about, and maybe I need to learn more? Maybe we could do an episode on that as well. But we are happy. Go ahead.
I said last word to you, but actually, I'm going to take this one last
Go ahead.
jog back to
Take
our
it.
theology. It's interesting here, right? I would say this: we have what's been described, Ben, Jared, and I, described by others as low anthropology, a low view of man, even a low view of ourselves, maybe even especially a low view of ourselves. One of our confessions in our Lutheran churches on Sunday mornings begins with, I, a poor, miserable sinner, which sounds like, man, you guys are downers. But I'd say, hey, look in the mirror any given day, any given hour, really. I, poor, miserable sinner. In fact, it's been said that the theology of sin is the one provable theology, right? All of us want to be of a caliber that we're not. We want to refrain from things that we too often do. The Apostle Paul will kind of sum all that up with words like, oh, wretched man that I am, who will save me from this body of death? So here we're talking about money, and we're saying one of the big problems with our money is it has too many people in the midst of it who are in positions where they have to essentially say, trust me, trust me. Meanwhile, we are not a one of us, and certainly not collectively are we that trustworthy. The Christian message basically says, yeah, that's not only your problem in the day-to-day life, walking around with commerce, with life and living, but that's a problem between you and God. And so this is just a fun one to say, here's how the Christian message is actually different. It's not somebody has created something, but rather that God made himself man. He came down and he was without corruption, whereas I am corrupted and so are you. And that then he gave his life as a substitute for yours and mine and made a great exchange, my corruption for his holiness. And he did that even to death. And then he rose, and instead of coming back and saying, I'm alive and I come in vengeance, which is sort of like a lot of horror movies, the words on his lips are peace be with you. So we're pretty darn excited about Bitcoin. I know this for a fact. Back to those families we talked about at the introduction time and the like, both at our dinner table and then with our neighbors and with all of our listeners. We are so much more excited about the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ. So if you want to know more about that, find for yourself somebody local to talk with. Maybe a local Lutheran pastor would be one place you could go, a local Christian friend, or look us up, and I know we'd talk with you about it as well. Peace out.